a bad habit.
Sometimes you just gotta adorn yourself. I feel like I do it more during like transitional times.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
Do what?
like buy more stuff for myself and like.
Oh, for sure. Well, that's what I was saying earlier. It's because like I'm feeling the transition like so much more easier to focus on like buying pretty things than to focus on all the shit that I feel like I have to do.
Thanks.
It's back on there.
So I'm rolling.
Woo!
Yeah. And it's an important day because today we're transferring back celebration, the remains over the physical aspect of celebration, picking up the last things around the house, putting it all together. And yeah, so we're here gathered to talk about what we learned in this experience. And there's different aspects of this story to be told by different people. And there's an underlying thread that goes through all those stories, and the closer we get to that thread, I think the better for everyone to derive their own medicine out of what transpired here. And here is also Jonny, that was part of Celebration 2.0, and another part of another experiment, another layer of the experiment, another phase of the experiment. Josette, that became a living member during that transition. Came to live pretty much evenly between those two, the transition between Celebration 1.0 and 2.0. We have Lydia, that is an agent of Celebration, and how do we call it, an outside agent? Non-living agent?
I'm living. I'm non-resident maybe.
We have Pax, also part of Celebration 1.0, and lived through the transition, and that this moment happened to serendipitously fall into this gathering. Because yeah, so I also like to align this with something very meaningful that happened, something very which in this observation that we're gonna explore to see what validity does it have, but this video that was of great importance, this talk by Simon Sinek, that he, basically that in my experience carries a lot of meaning and a lot of what we were trying to do here. And one of the aspects that he brings into that question, which I think would be a good subject to expand through this talk, would be he asked the question, who are these people? Like the Johnny Bravos, the people that are the heroes, the leaders, the people that undertake certain energy sacrifices in order to help others. So basically his talk starts with simply asking, and basically the theme of his talk is how we can identify these people and what value do they have for society and for these times that we're living right now. So this is the subject that I want to open up today in this talk and see what you guys think about it and what you guys experiences was.
Thank you, Sebastian, for introducing yourself. That was nice. Yeah, obviously, like you said, this is our perspectives and our stories and our experiences. Not speaking for anyone, but those who are sitting here today. And it's wild, yeah, just painting over the celebration logo and closing up the journey and the nostalgia. Yeah, I don't know, I'm just feeling like so blessed that we got to live here for 2 years, some of us, and even just like a little bit, I don't know, that's a different experience, but wow. Yeah, I feel blessed to have such a rich, colorful life, and I think this has like probably been one of the most colorful chapters for me, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Lydia. But for some others it wasn't.
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
For some others the experience was black and white, for some others the experience was black. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like it'll be interesting to talk about it. Yeah, that's done. In like conjunction with like the perspective of this, you know, one of the original intentions of this being.
Choo-choo.
Choo-choo. Essentially like a micro representation of the larger society. Like that was kind of like one of the aims, was this to be like an experiment, you know, considering fractal knowledge and fractal math and just that phenomenon, like us being a micro version of the macro, and you know, and definitely not everyone in the larger society is having a good experience or learning from their experiences, and some are, and there's a whole like range, you know, scale of people and their experiences, and I think we really saw that. Like we really saw such a array of experiences and interactions, and like what people got out of it was all very different. Yeah, it's like when you think about a body decaying, like a dead animal or something, and like all of the cells of it are probably having like a different experience during that process of decay and regrowth. Those cells then transform into different things, you know. Some of them might go back into the earth like and become plants, and some might, you know, become soil, and so it's kind of like that. Some people grew, and like maybe some people kind of went into a darker place because they need to, you know, be there for a while in that space of kind of like darkness, you know, until they're ready to grow into a plant. So that's one way of looking at it. It was definitely an experiment and a fun one for me.
I really like the plant, or the dead body. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the aspect. I mean, you're touching into the aspect of you know, how we consider celebration to be an organic model, because it can go through these phases. It can go through a phase of growth, you know, peak and decay, you know, and that's the idea. That's how we learn. We learn from iteration. That's how every organism and life grows, you know, by iteration, trying different iterations of things and seeing what works and what doesn't. And instead of like what we consider systems, you know, which is what we see outside, we see systems, and systems, you know, in a way tries to imply to something that is permanent, something that is gonna last for a certain amount of time, something that is linear. But we're looking more into something that can go into these phases, and as it go into these phases, how can we ride the wave so that at every phase we're learning and even in the decay phase, for example, learn. And this is what we're doing right now, you know. So yeah, in a way, that's why, you know, we see it as mimicking nature. You know, an organic model is something that tries to mimic nature, tries to embrace impermanence, tries to embrace the natural tendencies of life, you know, and the forces that are constantly balancing themselves, you know, the positive and the negative that is constantly at balance. You know, sometimes if you bring, you know, from my perspective, this could be my observation, but when you bring good into the world, it creates also, it swings the pendulum as well, and then there's going to be a backlash. If you bring something bad into the world, again, it's going to offset the status quo. And when you offset the status quo, there's always energies that are going to come from every other angle, affecting us and, you know, putting us at different tests. So therefore, from those experiences, we can grow and we can understand ourselves and really provide, you know, our testimony to others, so that they can reiterate or see what, you know, what we have experienced, so that they don't have to, you know, again, carve that painful path that sometimes could be seen as painful, sometimes could be seen as a celebration of all. So.
Yeah, I guess we're talking about kind of like what we did to and are doing to be on the side of celebration still, and it's a practice for sure, you know, it's like an active practice of not being swayed and listening to your heart and focusing on yourself ultimately, you know. That being like the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself. Is that?
Oops.
Mama. Yeah.
Here comes the music. Yeah, one of the aspects now, like for example at this stage, which is the stage of the dead, you know, the dead carcasses. You know, one thing that I had a realization recently, like the day before yesterday or something like that, was that ultimately celebration was about picking up your shit, you know, taking care of your shit. You know, how is it that you can, you know, like in Rick and Morty, when Rick said, you know, Morty's like, you know, take your shit, wrap it up and take your shit, you know, like take care of your shit. That's all it is, you know. It's like, and I see it, as you were saying, as a microcosmic, you know, aspect, how the property, leaving the property, you know, in perfect condition, you know, as we found it, you know, leaving everything as we compromise, and at every single stage of it, you know, really taking care of the impact that we have on the world and others. And so that, for example, whenever there was, you know, these landlords will have the experience, yes, we have this community and it was beautiful, and it didn't last it, or they had problems and it dissolved, but at all stages of the way we were, you know, it was wonderful. And that's something that, you know, I see that Mike and Judy have that testimony for us. And so yeah, and ultimately, you know, we saw it, like for example in cases like you know, where people were not completely synchronized as of what we were doing, and we could see that we would be picking up for what they were not picking up for, you know, and then ultimately that would lead to certain aspects in which we will question, you know, their belonging here, you know. And I see, for example, that one of the aspects that we lacked is that, as you know, Simon Sinek point out in that video, is that we as leaders are the ones that are in charge of that circle of trust. You know, we are the ones that need to maintain that tension. and that if someone is not picking up the weight for each other, you know, then we should be able to, you know, non-taking it personally, being able to point out that the tension is not being maintained, the tension that we all agreed. And if there has not been a conversation of us of what tension is to be agreed, then, you know, have more and more, you know, insight into it. But yeah, so that's why one of the aspects that I think is very crucial in his talk, that, you know, when he talks about the example of the 4 bulls looking in the 4 directions when the lions were trying to get at them, that at every angle that the lion was trying to get them, you know, if they were, you know, if the bulls were taking care of their part of their corner, there was no way that the lion could attack them. But once the bulls, you know, lose the tension and started roaming on their own, then the lion came and killed them one by one. So that in itself, to me, shows that, you know, it's a tension that always needs to be maintained. And whenever, you know, we start living in community with people, we also get attached to people. And then those lines start to become very, very flimsy, and you know, questions about, you know, belongingness start to be very, very crucial, very a personal thing that we all need to find out.
Well, and I think like one of the aspects too that like makes that tension, you know, release and like not hold that circle of trust is that like we're constantly changing and like evolving, and like in every moment we're a different person ultimately. And so if we're not collectively setting intentions, you know, consistently and doing like ultimately what we did, like brainstorming in the classroom before we had the property of like, you know, really intention setting. We didn't keep doing that because like our meetings were so caught up in like pragmatics and event planning and interpersonal work that we weren't taking time for the intention setting and like that more like kind of heady philosophical side of things. It's actually really important to like maintain, I think, a mutual understanding of what that circle of trust is. And you advocated for it definitely a few times, and making like wanting to do that during meetings, and it was always the thing and put on the back burner, especially leading up to the disintegration of 1.0, kind of in, you know, last spring, late winter. You were advocating for more of that, and when quarantine hit, we kind of did try to make more time for it, like doing, you know, the Enneagram and the different, you know, we had more time to prioritize that, which was good for a second, but it was almost too late because we were too far apart at that point, you know, as a herd. So
yeah, to kind of add on to that, coming in like through the transition of 1.0 to 2.0, I feel like 2.0 didn't really have a lot of intention setting in that way, and it was just a lot of like adjusting, and like every person coming in basically at one time and all adjusting at one time and not like having any intention setting, and there being like a like misunderstanding even with some people of like, you know, what celebration really is. And I think that had played a really big factor in, you know, how everything was transpired.
Yeah, part of the wheels, I mean, like at the top it said gather, right? And I feel like it never even did that in 2.0. We never even got through that phase because y'all were in Florida. And then they caused all that, you know, chaos, or just stuff started happening, and things just were out of hand at that point, too quick.
Step 1 didn't even happen. And like, you know, to take accountability for our end of things, like I said, we weren't doing that, you know, consistently either, and so like we were like putting off the mission statement, like that was like always the last thing on the list for some reason. I'm like, that should be number 1, you know, in hindsight, I guess. But and had we had that clear for you guys, it might have been a lot smoother, you know, but who can say?
Yeah. So one of the aspects that, you know, Simon Sinek summarizes, and he says that the cost of leadership is self-interest. The work is to put yourself at risk, to look out for others. This is the anthropological definition of what a leader is. The work is to put yourself at risk, to look out for others. You see, that definition is new.
Yeah, it's interesting.
People. And that's the essence of his talk.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What do you think of that anthropological?
Well, I think like using the term at risk is like potentially controversial. I think there's a lot of like stigma about what risk is, and like, like we were talking about this the other day, Pax, like our parents used to always tell us like, you want to take the easy way or the hard way, insinuating that the hard way was not the right choice, and that we should be taking the easy route. Which was basically following their orders, you know what I mean, generally, and following,
keeping the status quo.
Keeping the status quo, exactly. And so I think that's something I've definitely discovered here, is that risks are like how you grow, and to be in a place of, essentially a privileged place where you feel safe enough to take risks. It's easy to get into a spot of comfort and then not take any risks, and that's like how you stay stagnant and not grow and have these habits that like might not look super unhealthy. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't, and it can be just going doing the same thing every day for 45 years and that being your whole life, and there's a lot of comfort in that, but it's not helping out anyone else, generally. And so like not taking risk as in like putting yourself in danger, intentionally, but putting yourself in a position of challenge where you have an opportunity to grow. And basically putting your ego at risk more than anything, like putting your ego at risk for, being wrong, or being reflected on in a way that doesn't necessarily feel good, but they can trust that you're in a safe place, and like we're all here to help each other grow. And I think the ego fights hard against taking risks like that, and it takes a lot of consciousness to decide to make the harder decision ultimately, and put yourself in a vulnerable place. And that's I like that definition, but I think it's important to note that like taking risks is a good thing.
So he actually, so that's one of he says the work is to put yourself at risk to look out for others. But the actual definition is the cost of leadership is self-interest. So self-interest, that's where we start to see the merging, or where we see where these two, we consider self-interest, that we consider the ego, the needs of the ego. And then we have, in a way, in the other aspect, when he says at risk, in the old days, in the times of, war, civil war or something, when the man or the woman or whoever had to go and fight, they had to put themselves at risk. So that's where the leadership and the heroism comes from. They put themselves at risk. And and what you were saying, I really like that aspect of, how we saw a celebration to be, is to provide a safe space so that we can take bigger risks, to create that opportunity, so that we had this tension, and we had all of these things that we were interacting with community, in which allowed us to expand into our leadership roles, in a more secure aspect, in a secure bubble that we could consider our friends, or because each one of us brought their own set of friends as we could see it. And then that opened up another layer, a greater exposure, which created this leadership. But at some point, that leadership was requiring discernment, which was the aspect that, as we were talking about, the risk is whenever you have the easy choice and the hard choice. And that came to us that time of when COVID happened, we were confronted with the choice whether we maintain this tension, and at the same time we were also facing the internal conflict of maintaining one of our members accountable for receiving reflection, which was one of the initial agreements that we had. And I think that as a whole, internally, that's where we fail. We lose coherence internally, as of holding everyone accounted for under the same agreement, which was to receive reflection, to be open to reflection, and to practice meditation, and as well as the aspect that outsidedly we were for also as well faced with two choices. So these internally and external choices were happening both, and that's what I think cracked Celebration 1.0. What do you guys think?
I resonated with that. Yeah, and like with the external, internal, there's that like on a physical level that we can witness and see, but then like there's also like internal stuff leading up to when it came to the surface ultimately, and what you described. Like I'm sure like maybe in even greater hindsight we'll be able to pull out some of those little things that we didn't catch ultimately that led up to what happened. But ultimately, again, thinking about like how fractals move, the, you know, inability to receive reflection, that was a pattern, basically. And, you know, if something isn't addressed, it's gonna, instead of like move in a different direction or reintegrate into, you know, it's gonna grow and it's gonna come forward, and that's what happened. So
it's gonna spread, because then, you know, that's what Simon Sinek explains, that then the fight becomes internal as well. So then you're also guarding against your peers. So it's twice the energy that is being spent outside and internally. Internally becomes politics, becomes like distrust, and then that's what cracks the cohesiveness, and that's where you know that's where, when he says that, it's the cortisol starts to drop. You know, the doubt starts to take in, and then cortisol starts to be afraid of whether one person is trying to defend their own or trying to maintain, or, you know, trying to point out at that specific thing that we were experiencing at that moment.
Yeah. And another thing that I feel like happened was like there was probably a little bit too much cognitive processing and not enough just like embodiment of intuition and trust, because ultimately to trust is to like mostly be in your body, I think, and to not be as much in your head. Or to at least like be very mindful about the thoughts you're having, and when they're ruminating, and when you're keeping them to yourselves, you know, because there's a lot of cognitive processing like in the group, but there's also a lot of internal cognitive processing that wasn't being transparent to the rest of the group. That was an issue. Yeah.
We found a certain pattern that the people that would participate in the meditations, I mean, one day I remember Jonny was mentioning about it, how, or I don't know if we were having this conversation together, I don't know how you mentioned it or if I mentioned it, but that consequently, you know, we can see that the people that were least present or never present at any meditations, you know, were the ones that in a way were more hesitant to receive co-reflection, or to be more patient and more broad with the addressing of the situations that were faced at hand. You know, did you?
Yeah, I mean, like their realm of understanding was narrowed because of that.
I think that like something with like meditation, it can allow you to expand your receptivity of things. Just like one of the many benefits of meditation. But
And we probably all share that experience, and there's enough neuroscience and psychology that also backs that up, and, you know, specifies that like there is no meditation truly like sitting. That's it. Like all the studies show that's like if you know how to sit and have like a good sitting practice, then you can apply that into actions more so. But a lot of processes that people describe as being like their form of meditation are kind of their form of escape, you know, because they're allowing themselves some external distraction instead of just sitting with themselves.
Yes. Yeah, sometimes we think like, you know, there are certain things that could be in the realm. That's why, for example, I have difficulties with what they call TM, transcendental meditation. There's more like a self lullaby how I have, to pacify your mind. And so things like that, like sometimes crafts and things like that could be used in certain ways to distract and escape instead of facing your mind, which is ultimately what the work is, facing it head on and be like, okay, as you were saying, receptivity, that's what it is, where you face it and you're not trying to escape from it, And you're like, yes, it's ugly and it's there and I need to put work on it, but then what happens is that, the more we tend to escape the mind, in a way, that's what I think creates the phenomena of, what we experience, the phenomena of the angry child. But, there was this quote that Adele brought to the, coincidentally, Adele brought to the group, that the rejected child, what's the...
Oh, the African proverb?
Yeah.
It's really good. I think we should look it up so we know the exact...
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Something like the child that feels rejected by
the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth.
Yeah. And we experienced that 3 times within the past, 6 months. And it's the aspect, it's not that we, as celebration, I think, yes, this is where we needed to grow, and we identified that we needed to create a more descriptive aspect of and an actual written agreement of, what is it that we're talking about, co-reflection and openness and things like that.
And committing to all, just as fellow human beings.
Because we felt like the communication that was given was enough, but in communication there's many details that are lost. But it's not until you see them written, not until you see, okay, yes, these are people that, because people came here to the idea, it could be understood, like, oh, this is a community that doesn't have a leader and it doesn't have a belief system. That's awesome, great. But only from that perspective, it's different from seeing like, okay, this is a community that has no leader and has no belief system, but has an organic business, an organic model that requires, in order for that to be maintained, something else needs to be addressed. Something else needs to be upheld. Working on our receptivity and everything that we lined up. We draw here, we draw on the wall. So, yeah, it was the fact that when we failed to communicate this or to really maintain the tension of saying, this is something that we all compromise, and the fact that you're not participating into it is actually hurting us at levels that we don't really can address, that are more internal than what we really experience. But so by these people not being able to face their mind and being willing to escape from it, then at the same time they will feel rejected by this organic model that is trying to emphasize, or not emphasizing, but it's only going to work if you face your mind, if you face your peace and decide to work on yourself openly.
Sure. And like on the other end of things too, there's always room to grow in regards to like how to be a leader and how to facilitate an environment where everyone feels safe to do that. Because like ultimately the reason it didn't happen was because it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right environment. There's certainly probably like you said on their end, maybe different intentions. And unclear on the responsibilities that they had in this community.
Responsibility.
But I'm trying to look at it personally as an opportunity to be like, how could I have somehow encouraged and inspired that person to face their mind? What could I have done better? And there's plenty of things I could have done better, and how could I have been more of service in that way? It's definitely a reflection that I've been having. Because I don't find it useful to, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I think there is a lot of blame in this whole situation, and, it's easy to do that. It's easier to do that. That's not the hard choice. That's not taking a risk. That's, you know, just, yeah, listening to your ego self-interest, and instead, yeah, how can we not blame anybody and just all learn? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's the essence, because, you know, like one of the aspects that I was want to bring is about that there's those who would easily fall into pointing fingers, where the lessons here is not about, you know, who did what, who won, who lost, who did, who. It's about whether the survival or the organism is what determines the success of what we created, you know, and the lessons that we learn. How clearly are we able to go back and use? Because as you were saying, one of the points of this is that, you know, and I think one of the crucial points and that dissolves Celebration 2.0 as well, was the fact is that, you know, when leadership, when everything is focused on one single point, there is a lot more pressure, you know, but when it's divided into different points, you know, like you have, for example, a triangle, which is kind of like, is the strongest, one of the strongest, is it the strongest formations on the earth? Is it the triangle? I don't know, I was reading in neurology or something like that. Anyways, the pyramid, you know, anyways, the aspect that, you know, that alignment and, you know, the precision of having these tension points as an attempt, you know, so important, so that the weight is distributed. But when in a tent, for example, if you put a tarp and you put the four sides, and then all the water pools into the middle, then from there is more feasible to break from the middle. So, for example, if there was a person, for example, that remained from Celebration 1.0, in this case me, you know, then it would be, you know, pressure was there, you know, and it was not divided into other people that could be like, you know, this, you know, what he's saying is what we had been, you know, enforcing and, you know, practicing and upholding as necessary tension. So yeah, all that tension went on to one single point, and of course, then, you know, many possibilities as of, you know, pointing fingers and fault finding could arise from that single possibility. But if we all were leaders, you know, in the sense of like the analogy of the bulls, if we were all able to, you know, or a greater amount of people, you know, were able to uphold those what we call the agents, those pillars, then it's not about, we can understand, people would be able, new persons that would be part of this, would be able to understand that it was not personal, it was not, because it's difficult to understand, especially when some of you come into a new environment, what is personal preference and what is not, you know. So that discernment and coming with ignorance could be tainted by, you know, that one-pointed perspective. So I felt like, you know, having different points, and that's why in some aspect we embrace the aspect of the agents, that as having different agents is what creates the tension and creates, you know, the more agents we have, the more coherent this group would be, the more this cluster, more, you know, more coherent it was. And that was the vision of Celebration, you know, in a way.
Yeah, that was definitely a tough position for you to be in, for sure. And, you know, especially after what transpired with us.
Yes.
And that happening so quickly and losing your family in a lot of ways. And then having to be the one temple left, you know. That definitely wasn't easy from what I saw.
Because there were 7, or at some point it was 7 new people or 6 new people.
And you right, yeah.
At the same point, at some point.
Right.
And it was right in the midst of what we were experiencing with not being able to be here for those emergencies and, you know, all of it happening at once.
And it's an easy opportunity for division because there's those, you know, clear groups and, you know, when it was the reverse and it was all of us and we brought in 1 new person or 2 new people, like Em and Melody communicated this to us when they lived here, like they felt the pressure of being the new people, you know, because...
And
Megs also felt that. A lot of people, so when it was like the reverse side of things, there was still that pressure. And I think we learned as a community how to you know, extend the circle and like find that balance and allow like everyone to have equal, you know, positions to an extent, or like, but it was tough for them for a while to like make that transition, and yet like the majority of us, like we're all trying to make it work, you know, which is like, first of all, the most important step. Like you need to like have compassion and want to make it work, not want to, you know, cause conflict. But then for it to be the opposite, it's like, yeah, that same thing applies, where there's going to be, you know, kind of two divided groups. And like it's almost like very generational too. Like we see it like as like, you know, speaking of macro, you know, this being a macro version of, or micro version of the macro society, like we think about like older people, you know, like the elderly people, and how we kind of like isolate them as a society and like basically say that like most of their stuff is like, all of their knowledge is out of date. Like we do not honor the wisdom of our elders in this society, on a, you know, very blanket statement generalization there. But yeah, we don't do that in our culture, and in a lot of cultures around the world. I think more and more, like there's more distractions for, you know, I think technology has like kind of been a big part of that, and it's just like easy for us to create division as humans. Like, you know, I think it's kind of a tendency that we see everywhere in all different levels.
They call it divide and rule.
Yeah, and it's something that I think happens if we're not actively ensuring that it doesn't, and consciously ensuring that it doesn't. And so it's almost like you were the old man and all these like young teenagers came in and were like, fuck you, like you're old and grumpy, and like we don't want to listen to you, we want to do it our way, and like you're just being mean, and like you're meanwhile just like not feeling respected at all or seen for the value that you had and the wisdom that you had from living here for 2 years and helping start this community. And yeah, so that is just frustrating, I think, to me personally, and I'm sure for you that was just frustrating. And
well, it's also, I think part of it was the process of choosing all by yourself, which had never happened before, kind of. Not all by yourself, but like pretty much all by yourself. Like with the help of like other new people who ended up leaving soon after, you know, like Sam and Selene and things. Like it had never been a decision of getting so many people, and the decision was so much on one person's shoulders kind of thing. And I think that like kind of uprooted like all of the systems that we originally had for like vetting. And so like I think truly a lot of the people who moved in here would not have been given a chance to move in here if they had applied like when there was more living members that were there for longer periods of time, which is just like, you know, part of how things happened and part of like the cracks that made it pretty destined to crumble.
That's why.
I was just gonna say, like, also with so many people coming in at one time, and like needing to like financially like fill like rooms, and I feel like the process was kind of rushed because of that. And also like the people who ended up here, many of them all at the same time, and they all experienced that roughness with transitioning into it, but it was all of them, so they're all like, hey, we're all feeling this, and you know, so what's going on, like, hey, you know. And then there's that resistance and there's that doubt, you know, and yeah, I think that was also a pretty big factor in the breaking down of
right. Whereas when it was the first and it was all of us and one new person came in, like they were going through that rough period, but everyone else wasn't. So we were all there to be like, you know, hold steady for them.
And we could tell them all that like expect they would bring up concerns and be like, I feel like I have no idea what's going on, or I feel like I'm doing something wrong, and we could all just be like, this is a transition and you're figuring it out. But when there's like 5 other people that are all also like not knowing their place.
Yeah, it's like, who is like holding steady, and is it like too much weight on too little of people, you know, because of you know, sometimes when you go through that transitional period, you need that help and that extra,
Totally.
you know, so when those hands aren't there, and yeah.
Especially into something so unusual in terms of that, like, most people don't know how to live in community. Like, that's not how our society functions. Like, most people don't even know their neighbors except, like, maybe their first name. And so it's a difficult transition, I think, you know, because it's like, what do I do? It's like you're a baby, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a bunch of babies. Only one adult, and it was a shit show.
Yeah.
Shit everywhere. There's poopy diapers all over the place.
And it seems like tying in with that, like, back to, like, the risking self for, like, the benefit of others, and, like, risking that comfort and, like, being able to, like, extend that extra hand for other people, and, like, how important it is that, like, everyone has that value in, like, living in a community setting, that, like, selfless service is like very important, that we're all reaching our hands out and able to help each other when, you know, the highs and lows of life are, you know, bound to cycle through.
And I think some people just don't know how to help each other, which is another problem, because they don't know how to help themselves. You know, if you don't know what a human being needs, like, aka yourself, because that's the best way to learn, you don't know what anyone else needs. And I think so many people are disconnected with how to heal themselves.
Yeah, it's like hard to help someone that doesn't want to help themselves. You know, it's like, why even try? Like, it's so hard. I mean, there's some things you can do. Like, I think maybe just leading by example is
It's the only thing you can do.
And hope it works. You know,
Yeah.
that doesn't always work.
True.
And
In the
that's-
way that you want it to, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm sure it helps in some subtle ways.
Yeah, and that really, like,
Yeah.
highlights, like, a really good trait in leadership, like, leading through, like, inspiration and by example, and, like, just simply being that example that inspires others, and like, to want to dive into that, you know.
That's all you can do.
Yeah, what you were saying, Jonny. Would you repeat what you were saying for a second?
About helping?
About helping, yes.
Yeah. It's just, like, hard to know. So it's difficult to help people that don't want to help themselves, and that I think ties into practice, obviously, and, like, what a person's spiritual practice is to them, and, like, if you can see, like, growth in people in quick ways if they're open to it, if they're open to helping themselves.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's a crucial aspect. That's a discernment that we all as a community needed to enforce, is determine, is that person willing to help themselves? And if they were not, being able to reflect and say, here, you're not willing to help yourself. And something to be clear, for example, and something that we lived into the last, persons that came here with problems, is that living situations like this, created by people that have not, psychiatric experience and things like that to deal with people with problems. It is essential. That's one of the essential aspects we need to be able to determine, because Simon Sinek says in two things, says the responsibility of leaders are two things: to determine who gets in, what are the values, and who we are allowing in or who we are letting go. So that's got to be one reason. And the second, how big the circle of safety is and how much we can expand it. So what those two responsibilities is about, as you were saying, is that these places, these clusters of conscious individuals, as Celebration was an example of, would be places that are not there to help people with problems. In a way, the organizations and society can help in ways. Those people, we are here to focus on harmony, on focusing on healing ourselves, and that only happens once we realize, okay, I'm willing to help myself, I'm open to start working on myself. Then that's when that person makes that conscious transition, then living situations like this are beneficial for them. that people that are already coming with problems with, you know, like alcoholism or mental instability, you know, these are not the places for them because there is too many moving parts, in my opinion, you know, in my experience. I don't know what you guys think about it.
Yeah.
I'm out.
I'm so glad you're here.
Yes.
I love you.
Bye, Pax. Thank you for everything.
You're welcome.
For such a small group, it's can't really work unless there are enough resources to help deal with it. But in such a small group, the probability of having those proper resources are minimal.
In our society today, like that could, you know, change, and we can imagine a different future. But it is important to highlight that the people who started this group met at a meditation retreat, and we're all in the mindfulness club together, and we're familiar with exploring the mind already and meditation to an extent. And I think, you know, a lot of us lost touch to that some of us lost touch to our practice, you know, in the place that we were in when we all met to a certain extent. Even I would say I was meditating less by the end of it, because I think there were certain levels of comfortability and not like actively setting intentions on a regular basis, like I mentioned earlier, that contributed to that. Like I, you know, reflected with you at some point early this year about my, you know, stagnancy spiritually, and that was a great reflection. And I think I became comfortable for a lot of reasons, and one of them was that I felt like the people around me weren't also holding me accountable because they weren't holding themselves accountable and they weren't actively growing. But initially we were all on the same page there, and at least like had some familiarity with that, and I think had, you know, felt like we had healed ourselves enough to be able to, you know, heal ourselves kind of more exponentially, which, you know, can take a lot more vulnerability and risk, and really you have to be at a certain place to be able to do that. And I think we were all at that place, and some people that came in, you know, when it was like kind of more the original group, we brought some people in, and later on when a lot of new people came in, I don't think there was that like initial understanding of meditation and mindfulness, or, you know, for some people the like mental stability to heal themselves in order to be healers, you know. And because it's like we want to get to a point where we can inspire, you know, and heal others who, you know, maybe aren't ready to be in this setting yet, but could be, you know. But for us as healers, and well, for me personally, speaking for myself, something that I've recognized, because I think that when I lived here, I did a lot of healing for others, and not a lot for myself, which was, you know, an issue for me. But I was helping out others a lot with their issues, which is, you know, one of my patterns and something that I'm working on. It's like a really good way to distract myself from my issues. But, you know, because I was living with these people who I was also like, you know, I was like helping them solve their conflicts instead of focusing on my own. I wasn't able to focus on my own. Like, you have to be able to set a boundary as a healer, you know, between yourself and those who you're healing. And like to live with them is not a conducive boundary for most people, because it's really hard to hold that frequency and that energy when there's people around who essentially like are, you know, not intentionally sucking your energy. If you're not at a point where you can really maintain that, which I don't feel like I am, like living in a place with people who need a lot of healing, it's tough. And like that, you know, it's hard. It's like that's coming from a relative perspective, obviously. I'm not trying to like rank people, and like it all comes in waves, and we're at different points. And there are people who, you know, and that's the other thing. It's like it's important to be around people who ultimately are like more emotionally mature than you, or like if you want to learn how to be good at something, you go around a master. You know, you surround yourself with people who are good at it. You want to learn language, you go to the country. It's the best way to learn it. And so it's like it is important to be around people who will help you grow, because, you know, there may be more mature in certain areas. And so like how to create an environment where that exists, but we're also all on the same page. It's like, yeah, it's tricky, I guess.
And it gets trickier when some people identify these patterns. So we had a system. We had a system of, calls for awareness, tokens, call of awareness and tokens of responsibility, and a certain strike system that acknowledges all these different varieties. But then during the beginning, which is the time that we gave ourselves to synchronize with others, people were not very open to the fact that some people determine whether this would be a beneficial experience or not. For people, was something that they were not willing to discuss, and that they were quickly challenged it as, oh, you're kicking people out. Whereas an efficient way of, because you don't want to, one of the aspects, for example, that I expressed to one of the members before, that was not really seeing this experiment for what it was, is that if you don't understand it, you will be misled. No matter, and you, in that beautiful quote that you created, that you expressed, you summarized it in that aspect, is that if you don't understand what we're doing here, you are, in a certain way, you're being misled. You're being, not in the place where you completely understand. The idea is for you to be in a place where you completely understand what's going on. And if you're receiving the prompts, and if you're not really open to understand it fully, so then there's probably, this is not the place for you to be. And then that was a decision that, carried, a certain importance, and that what would determine the who would be part of it and who would not. But in this times and age, when there's people that are, like for example with COVID, people were losing their house, people having problems, there was this sense of, oh, okay, let's help him out, let's help people out. There's this sense of charity, or helping one another out, which is valid and incredibly important. But up to what point we extend that? Up to what point became the tricky question? When can we? When do we have to say, okay, this is enough, and we need to take an executive decision, which is non-personal, but is with the intention of maintaining the harmony of the whole, And how can we detach our particular points of view from that, personalizing as a third person as well, because at the same time, when what happens is that as one person was let go, the other people were concerned. Oh, there was the cortisol there. Oh, am I going to be the next one? There's going to be this mistrust and this fear, that was impregnated around.
Yeah, I realized that because of the, members leaving, and everyone being a potential living member at that point, it made a lot of them experienced a lot of pressure of like they had to be like this certain way and understand this certain thing, and that was like, that definitely like heightens some like, emotions and instincts and resistance and back to like the transition, to all of them being in that transition period and feeling that pressure, and I think it caused a bit of incongruency.
Yeah.
And not having the framework.
Yeah, that's where we fail.
Totally.
That's where celebration is the whole fail.
And another thing that kind of came to me, when I was like, not to like rank people when I was like trying to explain that, something that I think we also ultimately failed to do in hindsight. Of course, none of it was a failure. It was an experiment. It was exactly what it was meant to be. But an improvement based on hindsight was that you and I think especially, were really feeling aligned with this idea of liminal leadership that I found in an article and shared with everybody, meaning that we're all leaders. We all have a gift or, gifts that we are given, and we need to be children, like beginner's mind babies, in the wake of others' gifts, and recognize and honor them for the gifts that they have and learn from them, and then also be able to embody and honor our own gift and share that, and be open to sharing that. And I don't think that we actively enough recognize what all of our gifts were and what we could learn from one another. And that could have been a process that kept happening, but like ultimately, you know, like you, for example, had a much longer, you know, history with meditation. And that is something that we all could have more actively learned from you. And we all have these gifts, you know, and I think that some people that we lived with weren't even connected with their own gifts ultimately and still aren't. And like, that's a path they're on. But we all have gifts, and we all weren't actively enough being aware of them and honoring each other's gifts and learning from each other, you know, because we all have something equally as powerful to offer. And we weren't realizing that, I think. And so when some of us, you know, tried to be like, this is my gift, this is my insight, accept it for what it is, you know, it felt like a demand almost, or someone acting on a superiority complex. And when that really wasn't the case was that person saying, this is my gift, let me share it with you. And everyone else being like, you're just trying to put yourself on a pedestal. And, you know, it's hard to share a gift when you're not honoring other people's gifts either. So it had to be a mutual collective thing, but we weren't really doing it and focusing on how we were all leaders connected, you know. And it was those connections that, you know, are holding the tension. And we're just the points. So, yeah.
Yeah, there was like that projection on you that like it came up through I think Rick during one of the meetings. He during everyone was babbling, and he was like, "Yeah, what are you, like our teacher or something?" He said that about you, and it's like no one ever said that. Like you, that just shows you like their like mindset about the whole thing.
And also, yes, we're all teachers to one another, just as we're all students, you know, and like
exactly.
You have to be humble in that process to be a student, and you have to be empowered to be a teacher, and we all need to find a way to do both.
And also recognizing that that's happening.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, like the learning process is happening, like interpersonally with everyone.
Inevitably.
Like,
but you can be conscious about what you're learning, you know, and like it's easy to learn toxic things because our ego's trying to teach us all the time.
Yeah, there was like that video I shared recently was talked about how people like cortisol is just an addictive, puts you in a totally addicted state.
Interesting.
And people that don't like it, cortisol causes stress. You produce adrenaline to help you push through it, and people just get addicted to adrenaline. They don't know it, so they subconsciously will seek out like just shit to tear up. You know.
That's really interesting.
And then they burn the village to get the warmth.
Yeah, and then they eventually it causes adrenal fatigue, and they're just like burned out at some point. They just like
crash.
You crash and don't want to learn from it unless they make it through the crash.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just a learning process for everyone.
Yeah, it takes embracing, as you're saying, ourselves, you know, as being fully, you know, being the manifestation of this divine energy, you know, and seeing ourselves as full potentiality, that there is nothing that needs to be added to us, is that we just need to allow it to be. And allowing our gifts is the quest, you know, and allowing, understanding and embracing our gifts and flowering. You know, flowers out there, they don't compete with one another. If you see a bed, you know, bed full of flowers, they do compete and everything, but then at some point they become, it's all complementary. You know, everything in nature that goes to its highest exponent, it shows symmetry, it shows perfection. You know, in a flower you see perfection, you see symmetry. So everything at its highest exponent will experience symmetry. So if we embrace each other at our highest exponent, you know, if we embrace each other's gifts, then that particular aspect of you embracing your brother's gifts or your sister's gifts allows you to embrace your own gifts and embrace the possibility that yes, if you put work and dedication which somebody else has done, you know, and not take it, oh, he has, you know, no, just take it, oh yeah, there is there is some fruits from dedication and discipline. These people, some embody that, some of them embody them. Let me see what it could be if I embody these.
Right.
What would be my gifts? What would be my contribution to the banquet? Because that's what it was. It was a banquet where we all trying to cook the best dinner to provide, and we can all share it.
Yeah, that's well said.
Yeah, there is something very beautiful that Sebastian also points out, is about the importance of having a vision, and how a vision has to be a vision, something that you can visualize, something that you can see. And we didn't have a vision. We didn't have it. We had an idea. We had a mission.
And a lot of different visions, maybe. Maybe some people are having different visions,
Maybe different visions, yes. So it was very important, the vision, and he explains it very well, and that's another aspect that we came to understand. But then we had a mission statement, and our mission statement was, we're a group of self-actualized, driven individuals trying to find harmony in a world torn apart by separation. That was our mission. That's what we were intending to do, because, we were self-actualized, driven individuals who are, as we were trying to be the best expression of ourselves in community. So that was the intention, be, a harmony, manifest harmony by being there. But our vision, what could our vision would have been? And one of the aspects, and I'd like to bring this up so see if you guys share this vision, but the vision is seeing clusters of self-actualized individuals living richly in harmony and sharing with community the blessings of their existence.
Yeah,
that
even,
to me was the underlying vision.
Sure, even that though I feel like could have been more visualized. That's still very cognitive, like that's telling, not showing, and like doing a lot of like writing and like poetry and stuff like that. Like it's a really powerful form of manifestation is getting it as visual as you possibly can, as visually descriptive as you possibly can. Like, what does harmony look like?
Yes.
And really like laying out what that looks like, because the more intentional you are, the more the more focused we are, the more accurate we'll be, basically.
There was a lot of homework to be done.
Totally. And like, again, when we were meeting before we had this property, we were making vision boards. We were pulling images and really talking about what we imagined it to be.
Yeah.
And something that when you were bringing that up, an interesting thing that I love words and like playing with words, and like the word division is DI vision, so it's like different visions. And I think that's like we weren't collectively visualizing what could be and what we wanted to be. We weren't focusing on that. If anything, what ultimately ended up happening is people were focusing on the problems. And if you focus on problems, you're going to manifest problems. And I think we saw that.
So,
that's exactly what he said.
Like, part of the cortisol being addictive is like, or the cycle of cortisol being addictive is like, basically just a fancy way of saying that if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always gotten. So if you're going to focus on problems, you're just going to get more problems. But if you focus on creating things and looking towards the future and just learning from what has happened and recognizing what you have now, and then, acting on what you can do to make the future better, like, setting yourself, anything you can do to set yourself up for success in the future. It's always a good move,
Totally. And the more specifically focused you are, like the more accurate you'll be. Like, I want to repeat that because it's important. Like, if you think about an arrow and a target, like, do you focus on the whole thing? No, you look at the bullseye. You look exactly at what you want to hit. And like being very specific in your intention settings is really important. And we weren't doing that.
In one aspect that to me, how I'm proposing this explanation, running it by you guys with this in this context, was one aspect that it struck me really deeply. What he said is like a vision is something that you can visualize, what Simon Sinek says, and as you can visualize, it's easier to manifest. And that's very important. Something that we couldn't, we it's an added aspect that needs to be brought into question, is that if you can create a vision that you can actually visualize and, see it as a clear picture, and he goes to explain the example of like, okay, like Martin Luther King's vision was to see two little girls, black and white, playing together in a playground, So in that sense, I propose I'm proposing this vision in the sense of imagining what would it have been, if celebration would have been to the point in which it happens to be a group, a cluster, 10 people of self-actualized individuals, living richly, living in harmony, maintaining all the disciplines and things, in place that we had, and sharing this with the community. How would it be? How would an interaction like that? How many leading by example could come out of that? How many different experiences and different things could happen. So, and the word clusters comes to me is because this basic vision also comes to me as well, as the overlapping of all of these ideas which come from, for example, the movie, the series Sense8 that I've mentioned how integral it is on its the importance of clusters. So what they have is like, if you guys have seen it, there are different people that are connected telepathically, but each one has their own gift, and at some points they start realizing, okay, yes, we're connected, and then they use each other's gifts to help one another, and then that's how they interact with the world. They become a cluster. So again, they're kind of like the four bulls put together, confronting these the difficult things in existence. So these clusters of self-actualized individuals are very feasible. Are very feasible. We tried it, and I think the proposition is they are very feasible, especially nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, anything is possible, really. But I think like there are templates for what that looks like. Like if we, look at more tribal sized, communities and cultures that have existed and do exist, and like the coherency that they have held at certain times in history. Granted, not always, sometimes the group is stronger ultimately and collectively more powerful because there's more unity, and there's a lot of things that go into that and factor that. But yeah, people honor their gifts. There's healers, there's warriors, there's creators, and there's just, and everyone's empowered in that and honored, and because of that, so much more is possible, to the point where not only is everyone getting their basic needs met and feeling supported, like emotionally and physically and spiritually, but they're also able to have fun and create culture and actively, create art together communally and create rituals and practices that then even allow them to coexist even better ultimately. And I think, we were doing that at a certain level. Like, we were able to focus on certain projects and make them happen to fruition. We had incredible parties that were like none other that anyone who came to them had ever experienced, including ourselves. And we had, Celebration Day twice, which is like a day full of workshops and vendors. And like, we made these things happen. But I always do pretty much in any situation that I'm analyzing, which is a lot of them, can see room for improvement. And I always saw so much potential and room for improvement within us as a group. But ultimately we couldn't do that because we weren't all honoring our own gifts and, actively learning and healing and wanting to do that. And, we weren't what you just described as being the vision. Like, we weren't self-empowered, all of us. And because of that, we couldn't manifest as much. We could still do awesome fucking things, and humans will always create culture. But yeah, I think like the enjoyment and the fulfillment and the harmony, that is really possible, that has been possible, you know, in history. We weren't to the level we could have been. We were at a great level and doing more than a lot of people in our society to make awesome things happen. But there was like more to grow, basically. We weren't. We like. I always was like, oh, we could have like made that a little bit. I'm a perfectionist too, so it was like easy for me to like be like, oh, that could have been better. But like, ultimately, like, we didn't have our shit together, all of us, you know, and all of us as a collective didn't have our shit together, so we couldn't do exactly like the production that we know is possible. Meaning, like, you know, a giant, thriving community with, you know.
Well, you can see it like Google. For example, of integrated based on visions and values, you know, and they're as selective as they can get, and they get very, very successful.
Well, and a lot of our time was wasted with dealing with interpersonal problems because people weren't healing themselves and like taking risks. And, you know, that time could have been spent making art together, like what we all worked together in the art studio that we created once, you know what I mean? Like, and so things like that could have been happening instead. We could have been spending more time planning events and hosting podcasts and meditations.
Someone that I have been talking to about renting, he mentioned that, like, you know, you need driven people, not just like wishy-washy. Or
The ones in the gray area.
Maybe I'll do it, maybe I won't.
The gray twilight.
You know, maybe I'll pick up my mug. Maybe I won't.
Or not even the uncertainty, but the doubt too. Some people don't believe that it can happen and that it's possible. And then some people, I think, don't even believe that they can relieve themselves of suffering, you know what I mean? And that's a problem. Like, that people don't give themselves enough credit, ultimately. And they're not going to grow if they're not imagining, you know, the best possible version of themselves and then, you know, embodying that. As an individual, it's the same thing, you know, that we can do as a collective in terms of visioning our best version.
And that's the whole aspect. That's the key aspect of it, you know, like, again, what Simon Sinek opened his talk when he said, who are they, you know, and he explains, you know, how biologically, yes, we are designed to be social animals. That's what he says. He claims that we humans, Homo sapiens, are social animals, and Homo sapiens survive with other, you know, amongst other species, but they only survive because they were social animals. So right now we are social animals, but we are all in separation, you know. So it's this dichotomy where we're experiencing, where we are only connected through, you know, through superficial means. So experiments like the one we had was a living experiment to the experience of human experience, you know. And then human experience that as social animals, what is it that how can we challenge the status quo? Because the challenge in the status quo was either we had a leader, a person that would be the executive decision-making power, or we had, you know, anarchy and disorder. You know, those were the two possibilities. But then the third possibility was liminal leadership, when we can all hold attention and agree on the certain vision and understanding as of to hold that tension and hold everyone, hold each other about, you know, again. So in a certain way, what he provides is this layout of how biologically, you know, by paying attention to our, you know, the chemicals that are produced in our brain, we're able to create and, you know, become leaders. And I think that in this experience, to me, and based on what you're saying, Jonny, as of what this new person is coming, people that are driven, is that, yes, to me, a spiritual person is not only a person that has a spiritual understanding, but it has some aspects of leadership already within them, you know. Because yes, you can read a book about spirituality, or you can watch a YouTube video and kind of have like the idea of what it is, you know. But in a way, really, you know, I think that for selection purposes, when, you know, we're inviting more people into communities and things like that, is really in focusing what are the aspects where you feel that you have exercised your leadership. You know, what do you know about leadership? Prompting people to see what their experience with leadership is, and you know, and how important leadership is for the survival of the species. Because at this point it's not requiring anything less than us being at our best socially and, you know, internally.
Yeah, well, and you know, he says we're social animals, and you say that we're separated, but it's not that we're completely separated, it's that we're consciously separated. So we're like, we've lost the awareness that we are social animals, and not just in the way that we're interacting with each other, but in the way that we're so interconnected on like atomic levels. Ultimately, like the differentiation between our bodies is, you know, like the way that we perceive, you know, our physical realm, but it's ultimately not real. It's just a useful tool for us to see like us as individuals so that we can survive. But ultimately on an atomic level, like we're all so connected and being conscious, like constantly integrated into one another. And so whatever frequency we're holding and intentions we're holding and experiences we're having and creating for ourselves is inevitably going to spread into the collective.
Yes.
And if we're not aware of that, then we're gonna not feel that responsibility to grow and to, you know, hold ourselves accountable. It's okay, we can hang out. So it's not that we're separated, it's that we're not aware that we're connected.
We're connected.
You know,
and the levels of connection.
Yeah.
Wow. Whoa.
I know. I don't want to like disturb him.
maybe with the bottle.
Oh, it is a mosquito. I can tell there's a fly or mosquito.
Yeah, that's a mosquito.
I've totally changed my relationships to mosquitoes in the last year. Yeah, we're okay now.
Okay.
It was a tough one.
Thank you for that. But
Yeah.
great observation.
Yeah, because we're not going to want to be a leader if we don't feel like we have to be. You know, like when I was at one of my worst points and like my most selfish points and also my most depressed points, you know, before I ultimately like kind of had this understanding of my responsibility as a human, I was living like I didn't feel that responsibility, and so I wanted to die, you know, because I wasn't feeling ultimately like that purpose, which we all have, which is to consciously grow and to live in a way where we're spreading love and, you know, helping relieve suffering from ourselves so that we can help relieve suffering from those around us. And like until I realized that connection between my own suffering, my own experience, and other people's, and if I allowed mine to perpetuate, which I felt like killing myself would have done, then that wasn't me being responsible. That was me kind of like being a little brat, you know what I mean? And being like, I don't care about anyone else, you know? And it was easy to feel like that way until I like really understood, you know, that interconnected nature of things, and that I had the ability to, you know, pull other people into that light just by existing there and just by recognizing that interconnectedness. And so maintaining a vibration, like a frequency as much as possible, obviously, like it's a practice, it's a constant practice, and I'm like not good at it compared to where I could be, you know, but I'm on that path, and it's, you know, I'm not going to shame myself for it, but I'm like working on it. But holding, you know, a frequency that I would want others to be feeling, you know, and then like really seeing that manifest in those around me. And so if we don't have that responsibility, then we're not going to want to be leaders.
Yes.
And you can't really have that responsibility until you've really experienced what that feels like, which for me took a lot of meditation. Mm-hmm. And from what I've learned about meditation from all different traditions is like, it's kind of the process to have that understanding, you know, and it helps people really become aware of that interconnectedness, which sounds like metaphysical, but is actually very physical. And like we're finally coming out of science to prove that, even though you can just figure it out on your own, but science helps.
Absolutely crucial, almost, to be able to sit still and just listen to stillness, even if there's sound happening. If you can just like, be able to hear the stillness underneath everything, it helps everything become clearer. And the more you do that, the clearer everything becomes for you. So, what was I gonna say about that? Oh man.
One aspect of the as you're saying is that first we need to encounter the problem. We have, like for example, one of the aspects that Sebastian brings in this talk is how AA is that you can go through all 11 steps of AA, but it's the 12th step that really seals it. And what seals it is service. So you make the conscious effort to go through all the 11 steps, and then the last steps is the constant helping others, the constant sealing of helping, the interconnectivity, which becomes the interconnectivity. So living in community is living in service.
Yeah.
Because, you don't know you're having a good day, but if somebody walks in, and she's pissed, or they are pissed, or he's, angry, it's going to affect you. So your service right there is to, see what the discongruency is, or where you set boundaries, or how you can help. So that's the aspect of service. So unless you're able to first of all recognize your problem as an addicted person being part of society and addicted to whatever that conditioning was, and then taking the steps forward to step into a role of leadership, which is again symbolized by the 11 steps. It's only when we come to the 12 steps is when we come together in a group of people where all these things start happening, and through service and over time, and experiencing this interconnectivity, because we have experienced so many levels of interconnectivity by being together, and so many different ways and so many different points, and how different personalities interact with one another. The experience has been so rich, and so much beauty coming out of this, so many experience, real experience, that I think that's what seals it. Really, that's what seals our leadership, and that's what allows us to then, devote more into the growth of ourselves. Did you remember what you were saying?
I did actually. Yeah. Well, this is like acupuncture is like is actually fairly widely accepted in the general medical, the Western medical scientific community, which is actually pretty cool.
To an extent, yeah.
To an extent, yeah. And I've tried it like quite a few times, and one of the times that I knew it was super effective was when my knees hurt once. So I had the acupuncturist put some needles in my knees, or I was like, my knees hurt, and he knew what to do, and he put some in my knees, and it felt like over the course of 15 minutes, it felt like a balloon was deflating in my knee, and then by the end of 15 minutes, the pain was gone. But this is all just to say that I've heard that there's an acupressure point called the Zazen point, which is actually the point you hit in Zazen, which is like Zazen being a body practice. It's just sitting down. You just sit your body down for a while, just stop moving, and just see what happens. But yeah, like that's I think has a lot to do with why meditation is so crucial, because like an acupressure point is a point activated to help release and move energy. So like the Zazen point is a way to access the energy of the mind, essentially, and just like be able to work with it in a coherent way, not distracted by materialistic things.
Right. And that's another point that helps me visualize. Like, so many people are really only connected to their mind and not their body. And so when we say someone gains an understanding of something through meditation, it's not that they're gaining any sort of knowledge, it's that they're gaining a feeling, you know, and to feel that interconnectedness through meditation, you know, for me at least, is, it moves energy. Like, it moves energy in the way that it motivates me, you know, and gets me connected with my purpose. And if we're not there, like, you know, we've been saying, you can't, you know, be a leader in a collective, and everyone needs to be a leader in a collective. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to work, I mean, it came to me based on what you were saying, is what Simon Sinek's, based on his proposition as of this being anthropological knowledge and biological understanding, is that he calls it a deep-seated social contract. That is that as we evolve to allow, you know, so hierarchy, according to him, which was really brilliant, this observation that before we were a group of people, and then, you know, you drop the carcasses in the middle, and it was, you know, at some point it was like, yeah, the alphas or the big ones, you know, will go and elbow their face to get to the carcasses and eat it. But then, you know, getting violently to the center would create enemies, and then, you know, they would not be alerted when they were under attack, so internally they would not survive. But if there were some people that some people would demonstrate, you know, character and driven or discipline or something, and they were, you know, in a way, they were willing to, what he called, you know, they were willing to let go of their perks when it matters, you know. And they were willing, you know, if they were the ones that were, you know, the strongest ones, you know, they were given right way to first choice of meat and first choice of mate, right? Because that's what the deep social contract was, you know, to get the faith. But when danger comes, that's when you need to let go of your perks, you know. And if you violate that, and that's what he says, if you violate that contract, then you're trying to bypass that in order to. So when he said, that's why, for example, he gave the example of the bankers, you know, that and how we can understand really what ethics is when we say that we are supposed to sacrifice ourselves for others, you know, and not supposed to sacrifice others for ourselves, you know. That is really that deep-seated contract, that if we are willing to sacrifice ourselves for others, and we're willing, the more we create that, the more there is this you know, coherency, that we're all protecting one another, you know. But when we violate that and we create, you know, because other people intentionally would, you know, and that's one of the dangers of being in a group like this, that we need, I feel, importance to bring awareness to, as the last point, is that to be aware that there are people that are intentionally intending to violate that deep-seated social contract and actually create polarities and, you know, create polarization in order to create, you know, divide and rule. So in that way they can, you know, don't bypass the growth that is required in order to be a leader, which is self-sacrifice, time and dedication. You know, you bypass that if you're lazy, or that if you bypass that, then you will be creating havoc and you would be violating that deep-seated social contract.
And sacrifice, I think some people hear that word and think that it looks like, you know, doing everything for somebody or something or some organization. But sometimes it looks like setting boundaries, and oftentimes, you know, people take on the role of the victim, and that is not sacrificing. You know, that is being selfish in a lot of ways, to like maintain, you know, that self-perception of the victim. It's egoic, basically. And so some people will do a lot of physical tasks for the group, or like go head over heels to please everybody. But if they're maintaining an internal dialogue, or if they're externalizing it also, of being a victim at all, or an inferiority complex, or sacrificing, taking care of themselves ultimately, that's not a sacrifice for the group. And I think some people will be like, I sacrificed everything for the group, and I still like got shit on. And it's like, if you're playing that victim role, you're not sacrificing for the group ultimately, if you're even like holding that mindset at all. But then in that moment, if you're also not honoring your own needs and own boundaries in a conscious way, and going head over heels for everybody else, then that's not sacrificing for the group, because ultimately if you're not healing yourself, you can't heal anyone else. So I think sacrifice can look like a lot of different things, and sometimes it just looks like getting over it, and like moving on. Ultimately, and sometimes it looks like setting a clear boundary, and being vulnerable in that way. So it's different for everyone what sacrificing means, but it's like it's really considering in every moment what would be the best thing for everybody in the situation, yourself included, and like finding that compromise.
Yes.
Because there's always one, but you have to recognize when you're being, selfish in toxic ways, or selfless in toxic ways, and not finding that balance. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, could you say it one more time, though, the line with the sacrifice in it?
If you're not willing to let go of your perks when it matters, you might be the authority but not leader. And the work is to put yourself at risk, to look out for others. That's the anthropological definition. And then we say what he says, what I said about the bankers, is that they were supposed to sacrifice themselves to us, not to sacrifice us for themselves. And that's when we can see those violations of ethics and morals.
And that's what the group reflection was for too, is to hold people accountable when they weren't sacrificing, or when they were taking too many perks, or the perks weren't deserved ultimately.
Yes. And then so from here on, again, one of the aspects as well was as we saw the vision, and I'm gonna turn it down to the last part of the podcast into what is coming for celebration, what we see as agents, and Jonny as continuing a sprout or a new community that is being placed where we had the station, which is we would like to hear more about it. But it's the vision is that if we have the vision that there is a possibility we can create a cluster of self-actualized individuals, that hold a certain degree of harmony to a certain point. Simon Sinek says, when you are in a state of leadership, you release oxytocin, and oxytocin makes you healthier. So as you belong part of these groups, and we can create these, clusters or finding what, continue these experiments as to see what combinations are really what works. We will find that these will be clusters of healthy individuals where healing truly happens. And he's approaching it, where we call ourselves like healers. He's approaching this healing aspect from, again, a biological perspective, as talking about the benefits of oxytocin, and once you release oxytocin, how you are in a state of flow. So people that can live together in harmony in these clusters will be constantly more prone to be in a state of flow, more prone to be in healthy environments, and more prone to help and expand, because that's the second thing about leaders, expand their circle of safety. How can we expand it even to the full earth? we can expand this, and and one of the beautiful aspect of celebration was decentralization, that this is not about one particular label of this cluster being big. This is about providing the experiment so that other, clusters and other people can take the example or the experiment that we have and make it their own. So in this, the path that is lay ahead of us is to write this, findings, what I see, continue to expand and to elaborate and experience different living communities, I have lived in different ashrams and things like that, and as we continue and we can share these constant experiences and meet together, have podcasts, we have a new experience coming up with Jonny at the Harmony Zen House. What would it be? So we can have more podcasts, we can have the books, we can have reporting on Instagram, different things that we have seen that other communities are adopting, that we, based on what our experience, what we say, oh, that could have worked in celebration. So continue in a more more ephemeral manner the intention of identifying what would be a good combination, a good recipe that we could provide to the world as to how to live in communities, how to live in mindful clusters.
Yeah, I have an interesting thought. It's like more of visualization, so excuse me as I put it into words. But something that I mentioned earlier is that, like, to exist as someone who wants to be healed and heal others, you have to hold a certain kind of frequency of protection for yourself. And we can get to the point, like you were just describing, where we can extend that everywhere we go to the whole world. So, like, essentially whatever environment we're in, we have a strong enough boundary where, like, we're protected and are able to only interact in, exchanging light and transmuting darkness, and not taking on trauma or any sort of, like, I guess, cause for, anything that, like, doesn't serve us, essentially. And so, like, a sort of something that we have always talked about and sort of envisioned as, like, being the, kind of like an ideal community situation would be as if we all had our own space, being like a little tiny house or, a tree house or whatever it is on a piece of land. And we, I think that's a struggle in the world today, in the society we live in, and finding land and things of that nature. But that's something that we always, I think, imagine being a really positive step. And that's a very visual representation of us having our own bubble, of protection and healing for ourselves, so that we can then go out and integrate with everyone else in a really grounded way. And I think that was something that we struggled with here, was maintaining our bubble of protection, especially as we were bringing in people who ultimately, like, we were bringing in out of desperation and, had more suffering to be transmuted, essentially. And as people who are sensitive, especially coming into an environment and then being around people who are, actively suffering or going through a lot internally, externally, whatever, it's easy to take that on and not be able to maintain that grounded nature. So I think, like, having your own bubble here, but also having your own bubble of a living situation to a certain extent, and I think the more you're able to cultivate that, the more you would be able to live in a house with a bunch of people, because, like, the smaller that bubble gets, and then you can go anywhere and just maintain it, you know what I mean, in your, body, essentially.
I can, like, think of an analogy between tiny homes and meditation in that sense. Like, I think that it can work in a community like this, like people living in one house, or a couple of different houses, but only if everyone is able to find their own tiny home in their meditation practice and do it daily. Exactly.
And I think it might have to start for people having an actual tiny home, and then moving towards that.
But I think it's like the people that were not able to, like, maintain, or it was not that they weren't even able to, it's that they didn't know that there was a tiny home.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't know how to maintain a tiny home because they didn't even know that it was there.
Mm-hmm.
That it was an option. They could have
Right.
moved out of their chaotic house
Totally.
into their tiny home for a little bit and chilled out for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And,
Right.
You know, like think of that as like your meditation practice every day.
Going into your tiny home. Definitely.
Yeah, and so like it would work in almost any
That's great.
situation. I think like you can get any kind of people together
Yeah.
as long as they can all sit together.
Mhm.
I think together is like really important too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Definitely.
it's essential.
Yeah,
It's essential.
it's super important to all like kind of share.
That experience, yeah.
Yeah, share an experience like that.
Yeah, that's a really great analogy, I think. Yeah.
You gotta find your tiny home.
Yeah. And also know when you need to expand it too, because like we all go through different stages where it's like, you know, we had different situations here where like I started off in my own room and Pax and Love were sharing a room, and then like Love realized that they weren't able to maintain their tiny home, you know, in that space with another person, so they needed more of a literal tiny home, you know, and to expand that. And I was at a point where I was like, you know, I can shrink my tiny home down, like, and like take it everywhere with me. And so I went into that room at that time. And like now I'm very much feeling like I need a bigger tiny home. And so like now I have my own room, and you all know that. But so we go through stages of that, and just knowing when we set that boundary for ourselves and having an option at the community for people to be able to do that. But ultimately meditating together all the time so that we can shrink our tiny home to our bodies and just take it everywhere with us.
Yeah.
That was the goal.
Yeah, and like, I think something that's like difficult for most people when they begin meditating, and why most people stop, is almost like you start building your tiny home and like run out of funds, or it gets too stressful, or you're just like burned out on this project, and so you quit.
Or it's built just enough that you can exist in it,
Yeah,
but it's still
but it's
not
still
like that
not
improved,
finished.
and then it starts
Yeah.
falling apart faster
Yes,
because it's not
yeah,
totally
it's not
finished.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So like, and that's just a part of daily maintenance, you know. and all
Totally.
daily maintenance.
Yeah, constantly improving it, you know.
If
It
I
can be
miss
baby
one day of
steps.
meditation now, I feel like the next day when I sit again, I feel like a crumpled robot made of aluminum foil
Yeah, and
or
that's
something, you know. Like,
So, and then like maybe there's a challenge accepted of like being able to meditate everywhere you go. You know, I think that's the next step for people who get to the point where they're meditating regularly. Like practice more walking meditation so that you can integrate that into your day and things like that. Because also there's a dependency on sitting there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So not that's it. Like obviously that's the practice, but
yeah, and I'm aware of that, and like I try and bring it everywhere I do that.
Totally.
You know, just all the time.
I don't
But,
doubt
like,
that. Yeah,
Sitting helps.
of course. Yeah,
You know, it's like
it's
kind of like just a regular reminder, like, hey, you're here. Boop.
take time. Take
Stillness,
time.
yeah.
Stop. You know, just stop for a little bit.
because we're not like balanced in our embodiment and our like, you know, like we don't use our mind in healthy ways, we don't usually use our body in healthy ways, and there's a disconnect between the two. So it's like, you know, if we were at a better place with our mind, you know, our physical reality would be better. And like we're just so focused on physical things that's what I had a problem with, of like people using physical activities as meditation, because it's like we've been using the physical world to distract us from the inner world for centuries as a species, you know what I mean? And it's been a huge issue, and there have been movements of people trying to bring back that balance of being able to be inward and external, and right now the balance is all external. So it's like the practice needs to be stillness and sitting. At least for a while, until we find that balance back, and then we'll be in a flow state and we won't need to sit, because we'll always be in this state of just like embodiment and you know, using ourselves as a tool for healing and fun and creation, and destruction, you know.
And distraction.
Yeah, the human essence, all of those things.
Yeah, definitely it's been an exciting chapter, an incredibly, as you said, vivid and colorful experience, and it's gonna continue. I mean, that's the thing. It's like we're gonna continue. The ones that find the celebration, continue celebrating in their own, and continue creating more opportunities for people to celebrate together. You know, I really think that that's the aspect, and I mean, and you know, the formula was there. You know, we were trying to find harmony by dissolving our egoistic patterns through meditation and co-reflection. We had it written in the wall. It was very clear. And then we find our direction by understanding the limitations of our society and systems. That's why we find our direction. It's not that we have a direction, it's that we find it in every moment. You know, so this was geared to the present moment. It's an organic model that is geared towards, okay, let's do this thing right now and just do it. You know, let's do this thing the right way, and let's like living together, and incredible dinners, incredible parties,
manifest
incredible
abundance.
Abundance. There's been so much abundance. We still 2 weeks getting shit, man.
So
it's just been so much. And yeah, so the last quote that I wanted to bring about in this video is something that you had mentioned, a quote that you mentioned about the agents. You know, I don't know if you remember exactly word by word.
I never do, and you're like the quote master, so I'll let you.
You know, that when you're an agent, nobody's a danger to you. But when you're not an agent, everybody is a danger to you. And that was the vivid experience of what celebration was. Is that if you suffer through this experience, was something that was not integrated in there, something that, you know, again, you needed to have a certain experience in order to develop that tenacity, or that, you know, sometimes we need to fall down in order to pick ourselves back up. So yeah, the ones that are agents unto themselves, nobody's a danger to them. But when you're not an agent to yourself, everybody is a danger unto you. Thank you for that quote.
Yeah, we gotta hold our own vibration, and that's the most important thing.
Yes, and we all have our capacity to find truth on our own. We don't need to depend on anybody, on anything. We are truth. So, thank you very much for participating in this. This is really exciting. This new chapter of celebration.
Yeah, blessed.
Matters.
Blessed and excited.
Yes. Alright, let's end it on smoke a joint.
Woo!